On this episode of ArchiTech, we take a look at the green initiative, energy efficiency, and actually biophilia, how architects of the design community and the technology and AV community can work together to make better buildings. All that and more. Next on ArchiTech.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is ArchiTech, Episode 8, Continuing to LEED.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by Atlas IED, innovative audio solutions for every business environment.
This is ArchiTech, a monthly look at the architecture and the AV and technology spaces and how they interact. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. Talking today about LEED, LEED or Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's one of the most widely used energy efficient building rating systems in the world. The rating is available for building, community, and home project types. LEED began in 1993 and has grown and evolved ever since. In 2011, the US GBC began the accreditation process for individuals as well. With me to talk about LEED and energy efficient buildings and how AV and technology can help. First and foremost, John Millade with White & Company. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Also with us is my buddy Patrick Cuddy. Patrick is from Legrand. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning. Great to be here.
Thanks. And here's the thing. So this actually started with a conversation between Patrick and me talking about LEED and how it's impacting. Actually, first of all, how LEED has evolved over the last, dear Lord, almost 30 years. And how it's evolved really in the last 10 years now that they're starting to do things like certification. Patrick, you are LEED certified, not as a building, obviously, but as a technologist, right? I'm
an accredited individual. I have a LEED GA.
LEED GA. All right. So let's start with this. John, we'll start with you on this. Kind of remind our audience what LEED is and why it's important to the design and the building of a space or of a new construction.
Sure, and that's a really good question. You know, LEED was originally developed as a market transformation tool. And so it's been able to pool the best ideas and the best standards from different states, different countries, pull it all together in a package that really help transform the industry. People can go above and beyond LEED if you wanted to really excel with energy efficiency and net zero or some of these other rating systems. But LEED was really one of the first American-based frameworks that made it easy for design teams to get a grip and get a handle on all of the different considerations that go into a green building. And with that has come a widespread adoption, both domestically as well as internationally.
So it is, you said it was, looking at it from that context, then was LEED, were we behind the ball, I guess, is the best way to ask this from a U.S. standpoint. Were we in lockstep, or were we running alongside other countries, or were we behind the ball, or are we kind of leading in that area? I hate using that term, but were we on the forefront and showing others kind of the way when it comes to LEED?
Sure. So I think that's a relative question, leading whom? And there are parts of the world that do have very progressive building codes and building standards, and the cultural norms are different. And so people are more accustomed to investing in efficiency, for example, or in comfort because they understand and they reap the benefits. There's certainly other parts of the world that are far behind and don't have basic building codes. And so there's a really wide spectrum there. And so the U.S. is in the middle. It's towards the top, I would say. And certainly these days, the technology is there, and we are definitely have the ability to move forward. In fact, they have published maps of the U.S. with which states have adopted and updated their building codes and energy standards. And it's really remarkable how much of the U.S. has taken that step with energy in particular to become more efficient.
Patrick, John mentioned the fact of technology, but we're bringing you in on this. How has AV traditionally worked in conjunction with architects, as well as design engineers and consultants, to contribute to a building's LEED certification?
Yeah, so that, Tim, that's a fantastic question because when LEED first came out back in, 1993 when it was started, and then that has gone through several iterations now, most of the focus has really been on that energy piece, right? And energy has really been sucked up by the different trades other than the audiovisual marketplace. Now, in conjunction with architects and interior designs, if you think about what a space is designed to do, right, is to create a feeling, create an environment, create an experience. AV contributes to all of that. But unfortunately, currently, AV is not specifically called out in the LEED system. And we're on, version 4.1 now as our newest one. So what we're talking about in our industry right now is how do we participate in the ethos of that design? And how do we contribute to the overall solution that is trying to be provided by the designers and by all the other people involved in that space and what is trying to come out of that? But we're really looking to take it now to that next step, right? How do we get our particular equipment pieces built into that standard for direct credit versus indirect credit, and maybe a fill-in on a particular category that's being evaluated?
Well, and the thing with that, so just to kind of remind folks, you can have as high as a platinum level LEED certified building.
Correct.
Base level is certified all the way up to platinum. Years ago, when I was a technology manager, I was involved in the design and deployment of a system building. It was a research facility on the Mississippi, and we were aiming for platinum. Right, so we were to get platinum, you have to have 80 plus points. That was my first introduction to LEED. Right, so big meeting with the president of the college. I want to do this research facility, and I want it to be LEED. I want to be platinum. Right, fantastic conversations with folks. I'm curious, Patrick and John. I want to get your 2 cents on this as well. Yes, currently AV is not called out. You can't put in a control system, regardless of whose control system you use, and get a point or 5 points because you have a control system. However, and we learned this by putting in, occupancy sensors, and you're putting in daylight harvesting, and you're putting in systems that talk with the AV systems and control systems and automation systems. You're able to contribute. So, Patrick, when you're talking to folks and you're like, look, we're already doing it, right? We're already contributing to these points. What does it take then to get AV to get points, I guess, direct points?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think part of it comes into the understanding of the background of how those credits are created, right? So to just make sure that the audience is, completely familiar with what it is, there are several different rating systems that can be looked at. And within each of those credit rating systems, there are credit categories. There's 9 of them, right? And so when we talk about the AV scope, we're really talking about just a couple of those credit categories where we can come in. And what you just mentioned, Tim, with the lighting systems and the shading control and the occupancy sensors and all of that, I think there's an easy way for AV to be called out in the innovation credits areas. That's how all those systems interact together and how they all work, right? How we need to then jump out is we need the industry to recognize that AV is just not a black box in a rack in a closet somewhere, and that it is actually part of that system. And if we can cross that boundary and get that hurdle covered, then we're going to have the ability to say that, we can go and say, you put this control system in and it will help with a point, versus it being part of that greater picture. Because right now, that stuff that you just described fits underneath the electrical scope.
Yeah.
And it gets credit. It does get credit that way. And so, we connect the dots on some respects in that regard here at Legrand. But specific to AV, it really only sits on the innovation and how all of those pieces and parts come together today. And I'd love to hear, John's thoughts on that as well.
Sure. And I think it's important to remember that what we're trying to do is design sustainable buildings. LEED is just a measuring stick to determine how well we did. And when we think about AV in the broader terms of sustainable design, there's so many opportunities that emerge. And, we're seeing now, whether it be LEED or other frameworks that are available in the industry, things like energy dashboards, or indoor air quality monitoring, all these things are becoming so integrated with building systems. And not only that, they're being displayed so that occupants have real-time information on how the building's performing. And so the systems are performing better, but also people are beginning to engage with buildings in newfound ways. Another good example is this notion of biophilia, in that we've spent so much of our time indoors, it's hard to really reconnect with the natural world. And design teams are doing this in a variety of capacities, in a variety of different ways. And it doesn't always mean, because of project constraints, it doesn't always mean that you have to have, desks out on the front lawn or out in the woods. There's ways to bring these ideas of nature into the space, whether it be soundscapes, the sound of water, projecting natural images on the wall. There's a lot of ways to integrate technology to give people a subtle cue reminding them of our place in the world.
So it's interesting you bring up biophilia, John, because a colleague of mine, Julie Jacobson, she works for CE Pro magazine, been in the industry for 25, 30 years. She has kind of recently discovered biophilia in the last year, and it was a huge part of what she wrote about in 2019. It was a huge part of what was taking place in a number of the trade shows that we all kind of go to here in the industry, both from the Kitchen and Bath KBES show, as well as CEDIA, the home residential AV show that happened in Denver back in September. But the idea here is that that technology can help us reconnect to outdoors. One huge example, and again, this is nothing new, especially if you've been involved on the home side or the residential side of AV, is giving folks a recreation of our circadian rhythms. And very briefly, and I'm going to bastardize this, and I apologize in advance, but basically, it is making sure that the color of the light that you're exposed to on a daily basis matches what's happening outside, right? So it is our natural. John's giving me the. I'll let you explain it better in a second. But with technology, we can take our light bulbs, right, and certain ones, and we can adjust the color temperature to make it more warmer in the morning, and more as the day goes on, it gets cooler. The light itself changes color. John, go into better detail on what I just trashed.
Sure, and it's not that we haven't been doing this. I mean, if you look at night shift nurses in hospitals, I mean, we've been trying to provide them the same type of benefit through lighting systems so that they're not falling asleep on the job, right? And so what we're now doing is thinking about how light really impacts our awake and sleep cycles, as you noted. And it really comes down to a spectrum of blue light that's found in daylight, but also white LEDs, for example. And so while some really like the idea of tuning light throughout the day, with warm and cool colors, it's not necessarily what you have to do in order to achieve the same benefit. Now, having said that, this is also a very contentious point in the industry. And I think if you were to ask several different lighting designers, their thoughts on circadian lighting, you'd have several different responses. And so it's something that the industry is actively working through, and we look forward to the evolution of the technologies.
Absolutely. There are other rabbit trails you can go down when it comes to biophilia. Some of it is the hot and the heat and the cool of the room and of your house or your building, what you're in, because when it gets at nighttime, it's supposed to be cooler because that's the Earth's natural rhythm. If you really want to have some fascinating reads, just type in biophilia into the Googles and go to town. We'll probably do another show on that, and we'll have Julie on. Patrick, I want to kind of shift here a little bit. One of the moves that has happened here in the last year or so is this move to have a continuous LEED accreditation, meaning the buildings are constantly being reevaluated for LEED certification. If they're getting credits from the city or the state or the feds, those could be, I'm not to say in jeopardy, but if you lose your LEED accreditation, you lose your LEED, tax credit, what have you. Talk for a second about what places like the state of New York are doing with this movement and how this is going to impact, our clients going forward.
Yeah, so Tim, you're spot on. With when LEED V4 came out, that is when we really started looking at this continuous performance of the space and the building, right? Because we had all these companies going out getting LEED certified, which was great, but then the impact after the fact is, well, that they did it to open, but now what? If the building's occupied, it's being used in different ways, and so there needed to be this measure, right? And that's exactly what you're speaking to here. Now that is. That's still working off of the theory of, people want to do the right thing. And that gets us so far with any of these certification systems, whether it's LEED, Fitwell, Living Building Challenge, et cetera. What we needed to do was encourage the group, the early adopters bought in. We needed to encourage what I'll call like the normalized bell curve group that says, well, we're in the middle, we're going to see what happens. And how do we get them over the hump of wanting to go this direction so that we can be in truly more sustainable in our communities? And that's where code and regulation start to come into play. And so to your direct question of what's going on in New York City or the New York space, New York City just recently adopted several laws that came into play that effectively target any building or any space over 25,000 square feet to have additional sustainability initiatives in place by certain dates. And they reach out into the mid 2020s and up to 2030 in that goal. And local laws 97 through, I want to say 92 through 97, if I'm not mistaken, but they started looking at things like having, green roofing for reflectivity and making sure that, we're using that to, get rid of the heat island effect. We're looking at, certain things about energy and how that's used and measured and going on. And so what you're starting to see now in communities like New York City, places where people know, regardless of where you are in the world, are efforts being put in place to codify some of these responses towards sustainability so that we do, in fact, preserve our environment for the future and kind of do that. And then you're also seeing the U.S. Green Building Council partner up with other new initiatives to create green communities. And, Lake Placid, New York is another example of that, where you have multiple factors coming into play and an entire community, which involves the actual residents, not just the businesses in that whole thing. And it talks about recycling and energy usage and water and all of those pieces of sustainability. So you're seeing this shift now to get more people involved because the early adopters did it, but now we've got to get everybody else on board.
That's right. And this move towards transparency really plays out in a few different ways. There's annual reporting in quite a few cities. So now, while people would regularly look at your MPG on a car if you were to buy a vehicle, very few people look at the energy efficiency of a home, yet the investment is much greater. And virtually nobody in the past was looking at particularly investment portfolios. We're looking at the efficiency of their buildings. And it's not just about efficiency. I mean, this data is now available. So if I were to be investing in a large tower in Chicago, I can go to the website, click on the building, and I can see what the energy performance is. This data is becoming clear and transparent. But more importantly, I think, is this data around things like air quality, which has more of a direct impact on occupants. And so it is appealing to many investor groups to start investing in buildings that are moving in this direction, that they understand what the risks are with the particular asset. They're able to mitigate risk. They can attract and retain tenants, and the tenants themselves are attracting and retaining the best and brightest employees. And a lot of that has to do with this continuous feedback of information on how the building's performing and how we then perform within that space.
John, I'll ask you this, and Patrick, I'll bring you in on the other side. Is LEED and energy efficiency in direct competition to healthier buildings?
No.
Here's the reason I'm asking that. Typically and traditionally, and I'm talking 10 years ago, one of the ways that you could get LEED certification is if the building was efficient. It didn't lose heat. It didn't dissipate, the air conditioning. It was insulated well, right? One of the things that I'm understanding, with just go back to biophilia for a second, in a healthier building, sometimes those materials that make a building insulated, that make it energy efficient, are not the healthiest ones to use. So is it, I'll go back, is it in direct competition, or is it just we have to change the way that we're designing these efficient buildings?
We have the technology and we have the means to design and construct both efficient and healthful buildings. And there's a number of examples out there. There are now entire frameworks and rating systems that assess only the health and wellness of buildings. Fitwell, the Well Building Standard, Reset for Air Quality are just a few. And there are examples where you might see that creative tension in, these trade-offs. And as designers, what we want to do is try to find, we don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul. It's about finding solutions that solve multiple problems. Today's lighting systems, for example, are far more efficient, and they're also better for the occupants, right? We can say the same for mechanical systems and other systems within the building. In the past, you're right, we struggled from having a tight envelope. Most of that was because the mechanical systems weren't designed to account, or they weren't designed in conjunction with each other. And so I think we've continued to evolve our practices, and we're over that hump.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, I mean, think about part of what LEED focuses on specifically, but and I don't want to discount anything that John just said. There's Living Building Challenge and Fitwell and all of these other certifications that are addressing these, but specific to that LEED component. Materials and resources is a category that gets evaluated within the LEED structure, and that talks about the kind of the cradle to cradle approach of where products come from. So it's the sourcing of the raw materials, how far they're delivered, what kind of materials they are, and you start bringing into things like RoHS compliance that started in the UK and has migrated its way over, and some of these other standards, right? Low VOC emittance, and all of that comes into play. So really, Tim, to your point, 10 years ago, yeah, it was a different story than it is today, and as we've gone into the 4.1 level of the certification system, it really does become now what I believe complementary to that overall goal, because you are addressing things like indoor air quality. And we all know, I mean, it probably begs to reason just to state it, that, residential and commercial buildings, or what we consider today to maybe be high performance buildings, are consuming a lot of, our world's energy and a lot of our water. And so that also speaks to the health and sustainability of the individual and how that individual reacts with that space. So I think as we look at how LEED will grow, and then some of these other rating systems will come into play to be, partnered up with that challenge of reading that, hitting that certification, we're really going to begin to avoid this conflict. Although we will have trade-offs of where do we get from who and how is it built, I think it's going to level up everybody to make sure that we're going in that right direction.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The materials landscape in particular has changed significantly in recent years, and will continue to do so. And you brought up the example of the insulation that might be hazardous from an emission standpoint or to occupants. We've been adding more and more insulation, using that example, we've been adding more and more insulation to reduce our operational energy use, yet the embodied impact of many of these materials is large. And so current research says that over the 30-year life of a building, the amount of energy used in the building materials equates to, just to produce, to mine them, manufacture them, distribute them, assemble it all together into a building, consumes as much energy or emits as much greenhouse gases as the operational energy of the building itself. And so the main difference, though, is that the impact of the materials happens on day one.
Yeah.
And so if we really want to address some of these global challenges, we need to look at what the materials themselves are made out of.
Well, John, that actually brings up a really good point here. Is who all is impacted in this new move to continual recertification or continual? When Patrick and I were talking about it, and Patrick's kind of the guy that kind of introduced me to this whole recertification, I equated it to a restaurant certification. My wife is in the restaurant business, has been for 30 years. Every quarter they get rated. The local inspector comes in and gives them an AV, or I think it's pass fail at this point here in the St. Louis area. But at one time they gave them a grade, right? You got an A, you got a B. Ones that got Fs you didn't go to. So who all is kind of affected here? Is it everybody in the chain? Is it just the architects? Is it just the technology folks? Who's the one who's going to feel the biggest brunt of this continual certification?
The design and construction community with committed owners are making it happen. Part of it's based on code, part of it's exceeding code. Remember that if you're meeting code, you're like one step away from being illegal. It's like when we designed a code, that's like, it shouldn't be a goal. Like that is the bare minimum you have to do. And so we should always be looking above and beyond and how we can actually do better with all of our designs. At the end of the day, we've been giving a lot of attention to building occupants as some of the primary stakeholders here. And that makes good sense. But as we get more sophisticated with these considerations, we're really trying to expand that realm of impact. And so now we're thinking about how does the manufacturing of these materials impact the folks down at the factory, or at the plant? What is the impact to the guys in the field that are sawing and inhaling some of the dust, when they're constructing the building? And so in terms of who's affected by these decisions, it's really everybody. It really is everybody. And I think we're increasingly acknowledging that and doing our best to address that.
Yeah, John, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it is, they say it takes a village, right? I mean, that's a common theme in a lot of different contexts. And here it's the same thing where before, I would say, Tim, it started with the architects, right? And they wanted to design buildings that were signature spaces, get their name out there, be first adopters, and have all this other stuff. And it was the emergence of that certification as the new flashy or shiny object. And then the owners came on board realizing, hey, wait a second, if I do this, I can increase my rent, right? I can get a better, I may be able to retain my tenants. Maybe they don't jump off ship and go to another building that's newer. I can do these kind of things. And there's all of this pieces and parts. Well, now, technology has finally come up to a point where we can, we're participating in that and we're recognizing that, and especially in this conversation, and thank you for doing so, that we now have a whole community looking at this. And I just had the opportunity to attend Greenbuild down in Atlanta this year, which is the USGBC's and the global largest conference on sustainable building. And it was interesting to partake in a high performance building conversation. And one of the buildings highlighted was one of the most signature buildings in all the world. It was actually the Empire State Building. And they're finishing up, I think, if not already finished, a complete 5-year renovation that affected everything from, replacing the windows, looking at putting in different HVAC systems and all of these focus with an emphasis on attaining a high certification for LEED. And I don't know which one they picked, so I'm not going to try to guess, but a very high certification on that for the purpose of tenant satisfaction at the highest level, right? And being able to say without fail that if you are using our space, if you're renting in the Empire State Building, your people are going to be more productive, healthier, and happier in the workplace. And if you look at that beyond, and you look at some of the major companies that we all know, and it's, you can basically talk about Google, Apple, and Microsoft in any conversation, regardless of what we're talking about. And if you think about them, they're also, think about their messaging and what they do and how they treat their employees and what kind of services they give, and things like fitness centers and food and access and sleeping rooms and napping rooms and nursing stations and all of the things that come together. That if you look at that at its core, it's tenant satisfaction, and tenant satisfaction is driven on how do I experience the space, right? And that comes back to all of those mechanical systems. But it brings us also back to AV, because if we think about how often we're in a building versus out in the real world, and to John's earlier point about projecting natural images and putting sound, waterfalls and those kind of things in there and reconnecting us to our greater environment, that's how we loop it all back to this technology piece and the world in which we live in, and how we're able to then say, there's a reason for AV to be part of this dialogue from day one. And the onset of that first, that first charrette or that first integrative meeting or building design, like goals conversation.
As we wrap up here, guys, one last quick question. Because we've talked about more than just LEED here, right? We talked about other certifications and other initiatives. Is there going to be one, let's call it an ombudsman certification, like one overarching. This is a well building that's also green, right? This is an efficient, healthy place to be, or is it the fact that number one, it's too squishy and it's too movable and it's too dynamic and it's going to change over the next 4, 5, 6 to 10, 20 years, to where these other initiatives, other certifications and other things are going to come up to where, you know what, today it's LEED. You're going to shoot for platinum, but you're also going to shoot for platinum at Fitwel. You're also going to shoot for the ultimate in well-being and ROHS and whatever. And when another thing pops up and we start talking about, like, maybe there's a certification for circadian rhythms in the space. Is that what we're going to, is that what it is, where all these various ones that we're going to shoot for?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of rating system fatigue in the marketplace because of the vast number of them. They're continually changing. You have to continue to hire consultants to navigate this, just like you might hire an accountant to navigate a changing tax code, right? So I don't think that in and of itself is a problem, but nature is composed of a diverse system. And I think we need a diverse palette of frameworks and criteria to really align with client initiatives and really their values. And so, if they're really concerned about air quality, or there's other drivers for concern about air quality, maybe reset's the best. If they're looking at a more holistic health program for occupants, then you might select WELL, or more comprehensive environmental impact, look at LEED or Living Building Challenge. I mean, different frameworks, and you can of course customize all of them. Now, the thing is that all of these frameworks, the real value is them being a QA/QC for the project.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, there's no such thing as designing to LEED standards. You don't get anything close to a LEED building unless it actually goes through the certification process. And that's really where the value proposition is to the owner, because at the end of the day, we shouldn't be designing just to meet a certification level. You design with a more comprehensive vision and goals, and the certification is the measuring stick.
Yeah, I agree, John. I mean, I don't think we're going to see, Tim, that, an overall overarching one standard for everybody to follow, because there are, different goals. Everybody has a different, somewhat of a different agenda, if you will, on what they want to do and why they're trying to do that effort. But I do think that, having all of the expertise out in the market is fantastic for us. And the diversified thought leads us down multiple paths of success. So, LEED was kind of, if you will, the grandfather to all of them. And then little things jumped out of there saying, hey, we'd really like to be a little more specific on this particular part of it. And then, that's how WELL got established, right? And it started out. We just wanted to get, partially. I mean, it's one of the bases for that happening. So you think through that, and I couldn't agree with John more. I think you start talking about this whole overarching goal, and that's really what we're trying to do. Now, what I would say to that, though, is that I think in today's world, the greater community is more aware of this piece, right? Like we hear about how global warming is happening and all of these other things, and e-waste is now becoming something that people pay attention to. And you think about just simply, the lightning connector for your iPhone and that charging adapter that UK said, hey, wait a second, we're getting way too many power supplies in landfills. You guys as major companies have to come together and figure out which one you're going to use, right? And start making that happen. And that started down this whole path with Apple. So if the greater community having this sense of awareness to what's happening in our environment is helping to drive some of this change. And I think in that, we have an opportunity to just continue the conversation regardless of which certification criteria we go after.
Very good. That'll be a good place to stop it, gentlemen. Thank you both so much. Patrick Cuddy from Legrand, how do people find you or Legrand?
So simply legrand.us, or if you're looking for specifically AV focused pieces, it's legrandav.com. And that is now the 7 brands that many people are familiar with in the legacy of Middle Atlantic, Chief, Audio, Daylight, and some sub brands underneath there. If they're looking for me in particular, patrick.cuddy, Cuddy @ legrand.com. Happy to help out there. And again, Tim, thanks for the opportunity having this conversation and getting it to this forefront. I am CTS certified and a LEED GA, so we can answer a whole bunch of questions on a lot of different areas if your community would like to follow up and reach out.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you so much. And John Malade, John is with White & Company. How do people find you or White?
Yep. White & Company is a design and engineering and construction firm based in Chicagoland. You can find us at wiGHTCO.com. And my email is jmlade at whiteco.com. I want to thank you as well for putting this together. I think there's a lot of opportunities here, and just want to remind the audience that while IT and AV may feel like you're getting left behind, it is an integral part to integrating buildings, particularly with the Internet of Things and smart building initiatives.
Thank you both so much, John. Thank you for those words. For me, for Tim Albright, don't follow me on the Twitters, but go by the website, AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv. You'll find this program and a host of others. While you're there, please check out our supporters section. These are the folks who help us financially, help us bring you ArchiTech, AV Week, Resi Week, and so many more. And a number of LeGrand companies are supporters of ours, so we thank them for their support. All that and more at AVNation.tv. It's AVNation.tv. Thank you so much for listening. That's all the time we have for ArchiTech.